everybody. I'm so happy to have Steve Kulls on our show tonight. Now, Steve also has a show on PTN on Sunday, Steve?
Yep, Sundays we're 8 p.m. Eastern, that's 5 Pacific, Sasquatch Detective, and we run an hour-long show. I know there's been a big clamoring to extend it, but we work so hard just for that 1 hour that really it's quite enough right now. But yeah, there may be a time when we extend it to obviously 2 hours, but we're still working on for 1 hour.
Yeah, I went over there on Sunday and I missed your show. But I had seen a little part of it. You had a guest on and he was showing a video. But I'll get into a question that I have. So Steve, can you give us some background on yourself, please?
Well, sure. I have been a professional investigator since 1988. About 1998, actually, I read a book called Monsters of the Northwoods, and it entailed a lot of stories about Sasquatch, Bigfoot in my own neck of the woods. Now, like many people who are just lay people, they don't know much about this particular mystery. I thought Bigfoot, Sasquatch, was just something that occurred in the Pacific Northwest, with the exception of maybe the whole Fouke, Arkansas thing. And as I learned that relatively there's been sightings in 49 of the 50 states, the exclusion, of course, being Hawaii. So what I ended up doing was I said, well, I'm an investigator. I know I have a background in forensic interviewing. So I said, I bet you I can get to the bottom of this and pretty much debunk the whole thing as just being nothing but a bunch of hooey. Well, as it turned out, I after speaking to several witnesses, really good quality witnesses, it was very clear that they had encountered something that they believed to be a Sasquatch. So I wasn't really convinced at one point in time. After about 7 years in the field of research, I happened to be down in Texas, where I did have my first encounter. I actually saw it through my night vision scope, and it really was quite life-changing at that point. So
you saw Bigfoot in Texas?
Absolutely. Yep. A little boggy area called Pat Mays Lake. It was through a night vision scope. I actually saw it stand up above these line of reeds. And the reason why I knew it was there, I was using a device called the heat seeker, and that heat seeker lit up when I shined it over that way. What it does is I can be in complete darkness, and all I have to do is just kind of sweep the area with this thing. If it hits something that's warm, it's going to light up like a Christmas tree. So I saw that, so I pulled up the night vision, and standing there above the reeds, I could see the shoulder and the head. Of course, it was very dark, grainy. It's through a night vision scope, but there it was standing there above these reeds. Now, these reeds were 6 foot tall, and this thing easily stood 1.5 feet, 2 feet over that.
Wow.
So then it scooted back down, it stood back up, and it took off. I subsequently, over the last 4.5 years, going on 5 years, since that particular time, I've seen one in Texas, I've seen one in Alabama, and I've seen 3 in New York, one in the Catskill area, and one in what I call my primary research area, which is up in the Adirondacks.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. So, in fact, the last 2 sightings have been within the last, since September 15th.
So how long have you been
13th.
All right, so how long have you been investigating Bigfoot? How many years?
I got active in the field in 1999. I started a little group called the Adirondack Research Organization, which was kind of like a grassroots organization, but it was really interesting because I had this big dinner plan, and there was maybe about 6 or 7 different people from around the state. So I throw this little dinner. We all meet at a buffet, and we're going to sit, get some tables, and talk. And this was about 2003. And as I'm sitting there talking, this guy shows up. He goes, "How you doing? My name is Mitch." "Oh, how you doing? Glad to have a seat." "Where are you from, Mitch?" "Michigan." I was like, what? So, people, I realized at that point, people were following this phenomenon from all over the country. And as a matter of fact, basically January 1st, 2006, I went national with SquatchDetective.com. I had always been, the nickname of Squatch Detective, I actually started in 1999. My Adirondack Research organization, actually, its website, I had a free website at the time when you could get those. It was actually freeyellow.com/Squatch Detective. So when it was time to go national, I just said, I'm just going to call it SquatchDetective.com. Mm-hmm. And really, it wasn't an organization at that point. It was just me doing analysis, and of course I have a lot of great folks to help me out. But I'm the driving force behind it. So, and you know, in the last year, some really amazing things have happened. Let me step back. In September of 2006, I actually started a radio show on Blog Talk Radio, Sasquatch Detective Radio, which debuted September 24th, 2006. It rose to great. It was the first Bigfoot show on Blog Talk Radio, and I brought over so many other shows that started picking up interest in it, that eventually I was working with their people that, you know, and talking, listen, we need to create a paranormal category for Blog Talk Radio. So on my advice, they created this paranormal category. Of course, as years went by, Blog Talk got a little bit greedy, and thankfully so, because here I am now on PTN with the debut just a few months ago of Squatch DTV.
Well, I'm glad you came to PTN.
I love it. I love it. It's been great. It's been fun. It's a whole new medium, and what I love about PTN is that if we talk about a photo, we can show the photo. If we talk about a video, we can show the video. You know, we can do these news clips. You know, I have a guest on, if they've been in the news, I can show that. So, and you can tell I'm Italian because I like to talk with my hands.
Oh, you're Italian. All right. What, are you Sicilian?
No, my family was actually, my grandparents came from Naples.
Oh, okay. We're Sicilian.
Yep.
I knew I liked you.
That's my one half. My other half came from Hanover, Germany.
Okay.
So I have quite the interesting mix.
So, Steve, now I see you have a hotline. How many calls a day do you get?
Not many, and there's a reason why. All my hotlines and my web reporting are all built to protect myself against pranks and such. Like, for example, when you call my hotline, you can't do it from an unidentified number. So you can't call in and try to block your ID number because it won't take it. You can't call it from a payphone. You know, those are very important things, because people that are not legitimate will try to hide these things. We see this all the time, especially on YouTube, where we have this great influx of all these, and some of them look really hokey, and some of them look really interesting. But the problem is that you see these anonymous names on YouTube, you go to talk to them, and they're not there. They won't respond to you. Or they come at, well, I don't want any publicity. Well, why'd you put it on YouTube then?
Yeah.
You know, so you have to ask yourself that. Conversely, my web reporting, and yes, I've got a couple of hoaxes on that, but I feather them out really fast, because what a lot of folks don't know is that every time they do a web report, I get an IP address. Well, I'm a former private investigator as well, so I know how to feather out all this stuff. I know where an IP address points to, and you know, I know I'm smart enough to know if somebody leaves a callback number on these web reports, whether it matches up to what they're actually saying they're at.
Oh, so is that why you're a detective? That's why you're the Sasquatch Detective?
Yes, yeah, so like I said, it was, you know, at that point, when I got involved with this, I had been an investigator for 10 years. So, I mean, I did have a childhood fascination with it. You know, as a small child, I remember growing up watching The Legend of Boggy Creek with my father, and it scared the bejesus out of me, because, you know, here I am 5 years old, and I said, you know, it flashes across, this is a true story, and they do this, and I'm like, whoa. So it stuck with me all those years.
So when you go out on an expedition, now, how often do you go out on these expeditions?
Well, when you say expedition, it's kind of, when I say expedition, I generally mean that's when I'm putting a team in the field for a specific length of time. But I can tell you how many times I go on scout missions.
Do you go by yourself?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, you do? You mean you go out in the woods all by yourself?
Absolutely.
Oh my God! What would you do if you saw Bigfoot? or have you seen one?
Well, I tend to do this. I tend not to talk about any experiences when I'm by myself, because I have nothing to back that up. That's just part of my credibility factor, and that's part of my philosophy. But if I'm on expedition and I see something and there's a team to have some kind of corroboration to that, I've actually only reported, I've only talked about one sighting where I was by myself to see it. I had a team that was nearby, and I kind of wandered off, and boom, there it was. Actually, that was my latest sighting, and I had about a 45-second sighting watching it stand by a telephone pole on this dirt road, and it went back in. And this was during the shooting of our documentary we're doing, and I haven't released the title of it yet, but it's a great working title. It's going to work. It's going to be awesome. But I called this team out, and I'm going over the editing of the film. Well, the cameraman was with the team at the time, not with me at that particular time. And believe it, they had found a big old scuff mark where the thing had stepped in over the gully from the road into the woods. And it was very fresh, and I was shocked to see that on the video. It was like, there it is. So, but all my other sightings have always been with other researchers. I've had a sighting with as many as 6 other people where we all saw it running down the Karlsruhe Creek down at Catskill. So that's just one of my standards.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Are you more apt to see it when you're by yourself as opposed to being with many people?
It all depends. And there's a lot of different strategies that I'm employing. I just came back from the Pennsylvania conference a couple of weeks ago, where I actually spoke to a lot of researchers, and I actually had the days with Dr. Jeff Meldrum and some other great folks like Eric Altman, the director of the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society, Billy Willard, the director of Sasquatch Watch in Virginia, just to name a few. But I laid out a big study of mine that I've been actually doing since day one, and basically it's primate habitation in relation to Bigfoot research or Sasquatch research. And what it does is it employs using some very scientific principles on how primates habitate, and in turn how we use that for research purposes, because all primates live a certain way and they behave different ways in certain areas. So using that and looking at legitimate reports, looking at their behavior, it can basically lead you to where you want to be at. And conversely, something I did not talk about is field strategies. For 50 plus years, we've been as a Bigfoot researchers have been chasing these things. Yes. And to me, there was a time when we have to employ a little different strategy. And there's so many people that will say that these things are like supernatural or have mystical abilities, exactly. When really what it is that we aren't the sharpest tacks when we get out in the middle of the forest, especially at night. Now we have to understand that the Sasquatch is a nocturnal animal. I believe, because of all the eyeshine reports, and eyeshine I've even seen, I believe it has a tapetum, which is the biological item that's back of the eyes that collect light that make it reflect back out, like a deer has a tapetum, as do other nocturnal animals.
Oh, is that right?
And surprisingly, there are about a dozen species of primates that are nocturnal and do have these tapetums, and their eyes generally during the daytime are very reddish in color, almost reddish brown. So that could explain the red eye shine. But this whole strategy I've been deploying, and it can literally have the ability to have a whole group of people see one of these things given the proper time frame. I
have never heard that about Bigfoot having the eyes that would glow, because I've never seen anywhere that anybody said that.
Yeah. Well, there's more instances of eyeshine in Sasquatch reports than there is of the infamous smell. Now I can tell you this, as far as that's concerned, I have smelled the Sasquatch once. I didn't see it. I heard it moving around. I could smell it, and as a result, I ended up getting a 14-inch cast. Fresh print again in my research area that goes back, going on right now, about 5 years.
Okay, so I've seen a show where they were looking for a skunk ape. Is that different from? Is that different from Bigfoot?
It's just a different name they give it to. Like in Missouri, a lot of times they'll call it Momo. In North or South Carolina, they call it Nobby. In some parts of the backwoods in Oklahoma and Texas, they'll call it the booger or the woolly booger. There's all kinds of little regional names there are, as there are worldwide. I mean, if you don't think that Sasquatch is not a worldwide phenomenon, people in China they call it the Yeren. In Malaysia they call it the Orang Pendek. In Brazil they call it the Manganpari. Of course, Nepal they call it the Yeti. Russia they call it the Almasti. So there's all these different variations in names, but they all pretty much relate to, and unlike a lot of people, the abominable snowman or the Yeti is not white in color, it's dark.
Mm-hmm.
What it comes down to is this has been a worldwide phenomenon dating back since the beginning that Aboriginal people have walked on North America. I mean, even the Iroquois and the Five Nations tribes here in the Northeast had the legend of the Adenarhe, which stands for stone giant or stonish giant. Samuel D. Champlain in the 1650s talked about, as he's exploring up the Hudson and the Champlain River valleys and such, in 1650, and he's talking about the Micmac Indians and their Native American legend of the Gogu, which meant hairy man-beast. This is a literally, every legend is steeped in some sort of truth. And that's why I think sometimes part of it, of the supernatural ability, comes from just the ability of these creatures to get away from us. They're incredibly fast because they're incredibly large. And the fact that they have a pretty good sized brain, so they're smart. Chimpanzees are incredibly smart as well. Mm-hmm. So these things not only have the proper tools, they have the camouflage at night, they have night vision. I also believe they have an excellent auditory function. Not so quite sold on their sense of smell because by and large all primates do not have the greatest sense of smell, not like a bear or a dog or even a hog, because we don't have as many nasal sensors like that's why hence we don't have snouts. So you have all these abilities that these creatures have, and we're kind of away from that now. Over many centuries, we're kind of away from those type of senses. So when we get in there, we're number one, we're on sensory overload. There's birds chirping, twigs breaking, leaves falling, there's leaf litter, all this stuff. We're on sensory overload as it is.
Okay, now I've seen where they say they eat some kind of a berry, but then again, I was watching a video on YouTube where this man swears it was Bigfoot killing his chickens. Mm-hmm. So, do they eat berries? Do they eat wildlife? What do they eat?
That is an awesome question, and I'm a firm believer that they're omnivorous. They'll eat both. They're not necessarily herbivores, because something that size, although the gorillas are herbivores, but I believe that a Sasquatch is omnivorous. It'll eat meat and it'll eat vegetation and berries. There's just been too many stories of somebody saying a squatch walking off with a deer, or hogs disappearing out of pens, something killing chickens. That whole Alabama case where I had seen it. Apparently, they were finding their cattle dying on the ranch. They had no idea what was causing them. I got down there, and luckily the bottom end of the cattle had been worn away by insects, and I flip it over, and it was very clear that the cow had its neck and jaw broken. And that's something a coyote or a bear or a wildcat won't do, especially when you check the hindquarters. And I know what to do. I need to check the hindquarters of these animals, because an animal like a bear or a pack of dogs or a wildcat will always attack an animal from the rear first, take it down, and then they go for the throat. Well, this particular poor bovine was missing all of these indicators that it would be a predatory attack by something of that nature. what I can say is that it appeared to have, it definitely had a broken neck and definitely had a broken jaw.
Well, who could do that?
Well, if you think about it, what I surmise occurred, it makes a lot of sense, because the way the vertebrae was out of the cranial saddle and where the break in the jaw was, it appeared to me that something had walked up to the cow, basically took it by the back of the head, grabbed its bottom jaw, and snapped it.
Okay, so if Bigfoot had done that, wouldn't he have taken the cow away to eat it?
Not necessarily, especially when you're talking, it was probably in the vicinity of 400 to 600 pounds. I mean, it's not without not within their limits by all means, but there's a lot of people who think, Sasquatch is 800, 900 pounds. I've seen it a few times, and I'm a pretty good judge of weight. That's what I used to do, judge heights and weights. And I would probably say that, your typical Squatch probably weighs about 400 to 500 pounds from what I've seen.
And how tall? How tall?
Normal. Somewhere between 7 and 8 feet.
Oh, is that right? Oh, okay. So when is there always an odor that you're going to get before you have a sighting?
I'm sorry?
Is there always going to be an odor before you see the sighting of Bigfoot?
No, like I said, I've had several sightings, and in fact, we found out that really, if we look at all these sightings with these odors, they only represent between, on the small end, only about 5% of the sightings. On the large end, maybe 10% during a year. Okay,
so then why do some of them give off an odor then?
Well, there's numbers of different theories out there. One is that it may be an olfactory type of response, especially like gorillas. They have olfactory organs underneath their armpits that when they're under stress, it will release, and it will release this oily substance which smells really bad. I don't know where I stand on this, but what I smelled like just something that was dirty and it was very unkempt. So I think, and that's the other thing, is some people say, well, imagine you got long fur in the forest and you don't bathe for a few days, and let's face it, you're pooping in the woods and you're doing that kind of stuff, plus you're laying in muckety muck, you're sweating, because it's a primate, it's going to sweat out of its skin, so it's not going to be a very pleasant smell after a while.
Okay, so Bigfoot has had sightings for years and years and years. Now I saw one show, and I don't remember the country. I don't know if she was East Indian or Afghani or one of those countries, and it was a show on Bigfoot, and this girl was by a lake and tending her sheep, and she said whatever their name was, Yeti or whatever she used, but it was Bigfoot, came upon her and he hurt her. Now I've never heard of a Bigfoot hurting anybody except for that incident.
Well, I have a problem sometimes with some of those reports. Obviously, this is from a place outside the United States. And really, the only time I'm going to take a report where somebody says they've been, hurt by a Squatch is here in the United States. Because, truthfully, what I have found is that that foreign press and tends to... they're kind of like the press of the 1800s here in the United States, some of them, especially in these remote areas of the world, like Siberia, or these Malaysian or Nepalese companies. Because what they do is they put these stories out there, even though they may be, they sound good on face value, everybody's thinking, wow, but without really investigating the nuts and bolts of it, I don't know. I mean, for all I know is that the follow-up story to that is that she lets Bigfoot in the cabin and hang out with her. So, and believe it or not, I've seen instances where, particularly this one guy who had this film, where we put this story out there, and this guy had a really convincing story on how he saw Sasquatch, and the guy's like getting all teared up on camera. But then you get him off camera and you hear the unedited version on how he shot it and it was doing backflips, like a gymnast. that tells me right there that, hey, you know what? It may look good on camera, but in reality, the whole story is dumb. So you have to kind of, that's the one thing I won't do. And in fact, like I said, my upcoming documentary, I'm not, if something is garbage, it's not going in there. I don't want that. I want my stories to be solid. And I interview very few witnesses when it comes to the whole thing. It's more about us doing our jobs and investigating the evidence and analyzing this, these phenomenal pieces of evidence that have come through, like, the 1997 New York baby footage, which really wasn't discovered until 2003, and I brought it to the forefront. The 2010 trail cam photo that was taken in Vermont, that I get a phone call from a buddy of mine, says, hey, you know what? Something was eating my apples, and here's this picture. And I actually got Dr. James Maccabee, a physical, an optics scientist for the U.S. Missile Defense System for 30 years, to take a look at that picture. Is this something, and I was like, Dr. Mack, is this something in front of the camera, or is this something on the ground? And he sent me a chart, had this long explanation. He went to the website got the specs of the trail cam and reviewed everything, and he came back to me and said, it's on the ground. He goes, and I'll tell you the next thing. This is either an incredible hoax or the real thing. So, we have that bit of evidence. We have a kind of a coincidental thing, a finding too, is I told you about the track I took in 2006. Well, on that track, there was kind of an anomaly to it. It was that we have something called Morton's toe, which is where the second toe is actually longer than your big toe. The podiatrist will call that Morton's toe. Well, for some reason, this foot had the third toe larger than the other. It was the longest toe on the whole bunch of them. Not the largest, but the longest.
And this was a footprint in the ground. Did you take a cast of it?
Yes, absolutely. That was in 2006. And what happened was this guy who had the trail cam photo, who happens to be a researcher, I've known him for years, and he says, did you see the cast I cast up in your neck of the woods? And I know him because he knows where my research area is. And he's like, did you see the cast I cast a couple of summers ago in your neck of the woods? And I said, yeah. I go, well, when'd you cast it? He goes, 2009. So he brings out the cast. And why wouldn't you know? It looks just like the one I cast in 2006. The third toe is the largest. It has the same callus type of abnormality on one of the heels. And he took this in the same bit of the forest, not in the same area, but completely in a different spot. And here it is, the same footprint, same length, same heel width, same footprint. So that's just telling me, that's verifying that, hey, you know what? People can say, oh, well, that's just the way the foliage fell, and you're all crazy. That's not really a real footprint, even though they just look like toes. Well, if that's the case, how did this guy, 2.5, almost 3 years later, come up with the same identical footprint, with the exception of the toe splay, which is always different when something is walking barefoot.
Wow.
So, stuff like that, that's what we're throwing into the documentary. Some forays up into the middle part of the state, where we actually do come across a set of prints on a sandbar. And I'm not going to give that away, what we discovered. But it's going to be a fun, exciting, eye-opening documentary. And we're shooting for a full-length feature, so it's going to be probably an hour and a half plus. And I'm just happy to say we're getting close to wrap up in the doing the video segments.
And where is that going to air on?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to market them and sell them on our own, either through Amazon or other different media circuits. There's a lot of other things in the backwaters going on that really I'm not at liberty to say at this time, but it may lead into some other projects.
Now, okay, so do you think a Bigfoot would ever hurt a human being?
Well, that's funny, because when I did all these primate studies and primate habitation studies, it's very unlikely that a Sasquatch would hurt somebody. Of course, anything will hurt anybody or anything if cornered. But the studies have shown that primates of one species very rarely will attack or kill another primate species. There are some exceptions, but for the general rule of thumb, that if these things were aggressive towards humans, I think there would be a lot more people missing in the woods. There would be a lot more finding of these ripped apart bodies in the woods.
Well, Steve, you know what I can't understand is, okay, they've been searching out Bigfoot for years. He's been, he's all over the 48 states except you said Hawaii. He hasn't been seen in Hawaii, and that's because of no forest? Is that, and no...
Well, no, in actuality it makes a lot of sense because it's the prevailing theory that the ancestors of these creatures came over with the ancestors of the Aboriginal folks that have showed up. So over the land bridge at the Bering Strait. So it makes a lot of sense why, Hawaii, this would turn up, not turn up in Hawaii.
Well,
because there's no there's no linking to, unless, obviously, the Squatches all hopped on a yacht. Yeah. and got over there. But
yeah. Okay. All right. So what I wanted to point out was he's been studied for years and years, but there's never been really. Is there any real footage of him? And they've never found a body. Where did the bodies go? So okay. So this is This is my theory. This is what I'm thinking. I'm kind of thinking of what the American Indian thinks, that they are on another plateau. They come and go as they please. And I also used to think, well, you never have found a body. You've never found a body. You've never found any of their... they do die. So, wait a minute, let me finish. So they do die, okay? And they have offspring, and some babies don't make it all the time. They couldn't all live. So, but you never find a body. So my thinking is, okay, so maybe they're in another plateau and they take their bodies with them in that other plateau that they're on, or they bury their dead, or they eat their dead, so you can't find them because you've never found a body. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think that a lot of people get frustrated because there's no body or no bones. And until recently, I used the example of Gigantopithecus, which existed 100 to 200,000 years ago. It was actually the largest primate that they ever discovered. It looked very similar to an orangutan. And so 100 to 200,000 years went by, and it was only discovered by a scientist in 1934 when he visited a Chinese apothecary and he found these teeth. And that's all they had to go on until 1994 when they found a mandible. And that's all they have to prove the existence of this creature that existed 100 to 200,000 years ago is a mandible and a handful of teeth. They don't have a leg bone. They don't have an arm bone. They don't have any vertebrae.
Well, they were lucky to find that. Look how old that is.
Exactly.
But Steve, this is now. This is happening now. Then there's more and more supposedly sightings. So where are they?
Well, here's the other thing. Surprisingly, and I just found this out, I actually had dinner with Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who's an anthropologist, and he was saying, surprisingly, that there's very few bones in the fossil record for the primates that exist today. As far as chimpanzees and gorillas, there's very few. Gorillas are a little more because they're poached, but as far as the chimpanzees, there are very few, considering the chimpanzee population, there's very few fossils of chimps in record today. So knowing that how often do you come across a dead bear in the woods? You don't. You may come across a deer, but then again, there's millions of deer in the United States.
Exactly. So, all right, so what do they do with the bodies? Do you think they bury them?
They may. Then again, they may not. I can't really have any kind of opinion on what I don't see them or not do. Now I know there was a book written by Autumn Williams that was titled Enoch, and in the story that's supposed to be this long-term witness, he was stating that they do bury their dead. That may be true, that may not be true, I'm not sure. But I do know this, that number one, there's a lot of fossils. Just because science says something doesn't exist, we all automatically assume that we have a lot of these bones in the record, when we really don't. Even some of the dinosaurs, we just have a few bones, and from those few bones they've erected and constructed all this thing. Remember the Brontosaurus 20, 30 years ago, well, now it's called the Allosaurus, and it's changed a little bit. That's because they find a few bones and they construct these things that really out of just hypotheses. So the fact is that, you know, there's very few bones in the fossil record of a lot of animals that are even existing on the planet today. Not to mention, like they said the coelacanth was extinct until, poof, they happened to capture one, and now they found out there's yet a second species, a different type of coelacanth that's still alive. There's the giant squid, which was in stories of lore and pirate stories and artists' renditions of the giant squid attacking these ships. And why wouldn't you know, within the last decade, what's this? It's a giant squid. Oh my God. So, the wilderness, I mean, this is a vast, vast country. So, vast country. So what happens is, it's just like the oceans. I mean, there's places that haven't been touched by people in centuries that exist on this planet. And obviously, if you're a smart primate and you want to avoid what's going on there, you're going to go there. So it makes a lot of sense. It's not like a deer or a bear where they just kind of lumber around. These are thinking beings.
I happened to see a video on this park ranger that happened to put out one of those, I don't know why he did this, but he put out one of those, those hunting cameras, those camouflage hunting cameras, and I guess he put it on a tree, and he had it pointing toward like a garbage can in the woods, and he captured what it looks like a Bigfoot, and on the video, he marked, he said, I'm certain height and I would only come to where the marking on the tree, but the Bigfoot that was on there was way above that. Now it looks pretty realistic. Now the thing is, if these Bigfoot are starting to become more visible, because I'm seeing more and more of these sites where they've sighted one, they're starting to come out more and more, or are people just going to where they've had sightings and they're starting to bring their cameras? What's going on there?
Well, you have to look at a couple of factors. There's been a lot of natural disasters in the last few years in the United States. I mean, we've had, just since the beginning of the century, we've had Hurricane Katrina. We've had, massive flooding in the southern states. We've had some really bad snowstorms. So all these environmental factors can drive primates to move around to different areas. And I always believe that as a primate, they're going to be opportunists. Let's face it. Why is fast food such a hit with us primates here? Because we don't have to hunt and kill. So if they find something they can just grab as a ready snack, they're going to do that versus going out and hunting.
Well, Bigfoot's been seen in Willow Creek, and I've been there. We went searching for Bigfoot, but that weekend that we happened to go was one of their big, huge forest fires. So we couldn't get into the woods. Now, I don't know, but I don't think it snows and has that harsh winter in Willow Creek like maybe Montana or Michigan or these other states. So I'm thinking they may have started somewhere and then just started migrating out into, their different families, and then of course they reproduce. Do you think that's what's going on? They're just going all over the place? I mean, they're all over.
They have a plan. Let's face it, all primates generally have a plan. I don't think they go all over the place. I think they'll, and this is just opinion, but off of primate habitation studies, primates generally move under two conditions: food supply and inclement weather. That's generally the rule of thumb. Let's face it, we all need to work to eat, so we have a lot of people that relocate where they live for work. We as humans, if there's an area where we're living and we keep getting flooded out, or conditions are so bad, we move. Hence, why Florida is such a popular place. People get sick of the winter weather.
Mm-hmm, yes.
So, again, it all fits into the same pattern. So if there's a specific incident, and likewise, and maybe Sam Kinison had it right, that, we have these areas that are struck by famines and there hasn't been food in generations there. We should be sending them U-Hauls and boxes and moving vans, because generally, primates, when there's food runs out, they move to someplace else.
Right, no.
We found that true with the Native Americans. They had their summer area and they had their
they moved out of the snow, right?
And they would move.
Oh.
So there's a great example of primates, especially the highest primate, us Homo sapiens, using that same type of behavior.
All right. So say the Bigfoot moves out when it's storming and snowing and freezing cold, and they start migrating to the warmer states. It's not all wilderness where they walk. So how can they go from a wilderness and go through highways and whatever to get into another state that's warmer? They've got to be seen. How can they do that?
Well, when we think of migration, we typically think of the birds. I've found what I believe is a migration situation that, they kind of move to another state, but it's only about 30 miles away. And what it is they're moving out from the fallen leaf forest in the winter times to the more deciduous forest where there's pine, and that keeps a lot of the snow off the ground. You see, it may not be something like, okay, it's cold up here, we're going to head south.
Yeah.
They're not like birds. They may move to an area where the climate or the terrain is a little more beneficial to their survival.
So they might come down closer to the flatter land rather than being up in the mountain.
Or vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right, so on your show that you had last Sunday, I caught a glimpse of it. It was a replay, and there was a fellow on there showing a video that he had taken in his search for Bigfoot, and I think it was on your show, and on his video, he was showing that he had discovered a nest. Was that on your show? Didn't he play a video?
It may have been, but I don't think the show was last week because I have that 24-hour loop.
Okay. All right, so I've never seen that before. A nest.
Well, you got to understand, when I do a television show or even a radio show, I generally I act as really more an emissary than an investigator. It's my job to go out there and put it out there. Let these people have their say, and if they want to be challenged, I let the audience challenge them. Now, I'm not 100% sure that was a Bigfoot nest. It looks like something else to me, to be quite honest. But that doesn't take away his other aspects of Bigfoot research, his prints or his sightings or anything like that. But sometimes people can get Bigfootitis, where everything in the woods is Bigfoot. It kind of goes hand in hand with what I call the paranormal Bigfoot versus the flesh and blood Bigfoot. This thing boggles the mind so much that we can't get a grip on it, that we try to, everything's a Bigfoot. I mean, I've got people that'll sit there and say, hey, I got a picture of Bigfoot right here, and I look at it, and what I see on the picture is nothing but a bunch of trees. And they're like, don't you see it right there? It's right there. Well, did you see that? Did you actually see it moving around? No, I just started taking random pictures, and there's the Bigfoot. It's that kind of stuff that really, I can't validate, and I won't validate because it goes against my standards of evidence.
Now, Steve, you mentioned that you did go on an expedition and you were alone in the woods and your group was somewhere else, and you did see, and I know you don't want to, can you just tell us, though? I want to hear the story. You had seen a Bigfoot, and now how come if you're walking off by yourself that you don't carry a camera with you?
Well, you see, that's because as it is, I carry a ton of gear as it is. And the fact remains is that at nighttime, the best I have on me is a Sony Handycam. And I don't have even with an IR extender, it's only going to be kicking 20, 30 feet. Now, at that particular mission, I didn't have my Handycam with me. I was just carrying, there was just too many people. I was literally shuffling around. But the other thing is that even if I carry my camera without the extender, it's only going to shoot about 10 feet. You would be looking at something that's just completely black. Yeah. So they're not really effective at night. And not to mention, I tell people we're in the digital age, so why do we get blurry pictures or blob squatches or any of that stuff, or the video is shaky or whatever? Well, let's think about it. Number one, most people that are carrying cameras and they see this thing, this is not in their belief spectrum. So it's a complete shock, and actually in some cases it's quite traumatic. But in other cases we have where we do have cameras, being a private investigator, doing surveillances for as long as I have, doing a surveillance on a rainy day from a vehicle was a pain in the tush, because every time you got the camera sitting there and you're trying to shoot a particular person or a residence or whatever, every time a raindrop would hit the windshield, the camera would lose its focus. Every time the windshield wipers would go by, the camera would lose its focus. The technology we have today is all autofocus. So what happens is that's why you get these blurring, because in the forest, you got this leaf and that leaf and that leaf, and the camera gets confused at where it's going to focus on.
Oh, I see. So, all right, so when you were in the woods that time, you saw a Bigfoot. How far away was he from you?
Good question. I'd probably say within 150 feet.
Oh, 150 feet. And what made you think that it was a Bigfoot? Because of because the way he looked and smelled, and did you get an odor at that time?
No. What happened was that we had done some probes, and we had the sounds coming from all around us. So everybody's all talking, hooting and hollering at the campfire, which is part of my what I call my subterfuge. Because as I was saying earlier, they're so good at the forest, we have to be the top of the food chain. We need to outthink them. So everybody's talking around the fire, and they're making a good amount of noise. You can just hear their voices carrying and everything. So that's going to draw their attention out. So I just kind of quietly, lingered out to the roadway from the campsite. I stopped in my car. I had to grab something, some batteries or a book of matches or something. And I said, all right. I shine a light down one side, which is normally the more active side. I didn't see anything. And I spun it around and shot it up the south end of the road, which is actually uphill. And there it is, standing right next to the telephone pole. I can see the eye shine just glaring back at me, and it's just standing perfectly still looking at me. Really? And I just stood there, and I'm like, all right, I'm not going to get all shook up. This is, I've had these before, but I'm just going to sit there and look at it and see what it does. And I looked, and it looked. And I looked, and it looked. And the neat thing was, as I'm looking at it, I could see the eyes blinking, because they would blink out. There's these glowing eyes, and all of a sudden, burp, burp. So it was kind of neat. And then they got kind of looked like a head turn for a second or something. I just saw the eyes move for a second. So then I said, all right. I go like this with the flashlight, and the thing just kind of turns around and nonchalantly walks back into the forest.
Oh my God.
So I immediately get up the radio, and I'm like, and I send our first operations team up the road, and we try to corralling maneuver because we have a technology perimeter set up around the camp, and we try to flush it down through the technology.
Now, do you have any recordings of sounds that they make?
Absolutely. One of the neatest things was we did an expedition the month prior, and it was actually a longer expedition than this one was, and we caught, you hear us, we just had a very small contingent. We had 3 people on night 1, we had 4 people on night 2, and on night 1 you hear us, kind of amble out of camp, and then about 20 minutes later you hear something walking up to, and I use one of my high-tech recorders, which is an H2 Zoom recorder. It's 4 mics. It can be 360, but when I have a campsite, I tend to shotgun the forward mics, which gives me about 120-degree spread. And you hear something walking up to the mic, or walking close to the recorder, not up to the mic per se, and you hear this very low-pitch growl, which we believe is infrasound. I mean, it's so low I can't repeat it, but it was just ungodly. It was like,
really,
but it was really low, and nothing I know in the forest could ever make that low of a noise.
So now I've seen other shows where they had so-called Bigfoot recordings, but it didn't sound like a growl. It was like a yowl type sound, woo type.
Right, sure, and we've gotten those as well.
Oh, you do?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if you go to my video page, and they're very long videos, a couple of them, especially the first one, which turned out to be like 17 minutes long, and we actually covered the sighting we had back in September, where me and this other researcher had the sighting, and it was standing there 50 feet from camp. We shined it up, and there it was. But we've caught all the walking around sounds that, we're telling people on camera, we feel like we're surrounded. We hear those walking around. And we got the digital recorders out there, taped the trees and in place, and you can hear these things walking around.
And yet they didn't bother you.
No, you see, primates were curious by nature. Think about it. There's an explosion in the neighborhood. What do? We all look out the window. What the hell was that? Whereas a dog will go the other way. Dog goes under the bed. Primates are curious by nature. So think about it. You're in the woods. This is your thing. And all of a sudden you hear something. Well, you automatically start heading for it to see what that is. So that's what they do. They like to sit there and watch us. There's been thousands of reports, literally, of these creatures staring at children and staring at women in the old days, especially in the 1800s, the 1900s in rural communities, where they're putting out their laundry, and these things, all of a sudden they look off to the side, and there's one standing on the edge of the forest, just standing there watching them.
Okay, so you and all these hundreds of other people are searching out Bigfoot. Now, have any of you ever found where a Bigfoot would be living, where their home would be, or where they would go into seclusion?
Oh, yeah.
You did?
I know exactly where they're at. Now, I don't foray into there because habitation studies will tell me that that's where you're liable to get some more aggressive behavior. That's the whole premise of my habitation lecture, was to show people how to find these areas. And it's all based on behavior, because we all intrinsically act differently in different areas. For example, I like using humans as an example because we're the highest form of primate. So I try to relate what we do to other primates do. But think of it this way. we look at a behavior type of thing. Somebody's driving down the road, they see one crossing the street, or crossing the road, the highway, and into the woods it goes. What's the chance of seeing that happen again in that particular area?
Exactly.
Well, not very good, because that type of behavior is something, as we call in the primate habitation studies, called the home range type of activity. It's just, all primates have a home range. For example, you travel to different places all throughout the day, or throughout the week, or throughout the month. So those are your home ranges. That's your typical area of operation. And it varies from primate to primate. It varies from person to person. It also varies, it's all based on individuality. That's the amazing thing about primates, is we're individuals. So then we have these other areas where we call foci areas. These are areas where people will do activities. And our behavior's a little different there too, depending on what that activity is. For example, an example of some foci areas would be your place of employment, supermarkets, video stores, schools. But our behavior is going to be a little bit different if a stranger walks into a school versus if a stranger walks into a supermarket.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
Yeah.
So the next phase, obviously, is going to be your territory. Now think about how we act in our territory. Somebody comes walking in your door to your house or on your property, you're going to act completely different. I'm not a person, but a stranger. You're going to act completely different than you would if you passed somebody on the street.
Okay, Steve, tell me, what does their little habitat look like? What is it? I mean, did you stumble by accident, or when you saw it, you knew it was their habitat?
I've seen some bedding areas.
Bedding? Okay, what does their bedding area look like?
Usually, generally, it's under some nice fluffy trees that can shade them, that can protect them a little bit from the elements. And what we'll find is areas of, sticks and twigs that have all been crunched down and matted down in areas. Occasionally, some of this stuff I don't release because I can't say 100% that it's Sasquatch. So I tend to avoid those type of discussions. I only, especially on my website and what I put out, I only try to put out there what I have evidence to corroborate that, yes, this was potentially a Sasquatch that did this.
Well, let's talk anyway. Talk, even though you don't have proof. I want to hear it.
Well, you see, again, that I have a very high standard of evidence, and that I won't say that. I can't. That's the whole mantra of me and my organization, because when people come to me, they ask me legitimate questions. And if you ask me what does their bedding area look like, I got some ideas, but I'm not going to say with certainty. And like I said, you should expect to find some areas with crushed down. You may expect to find some areas that have trees bent or crooked into other tree limbs. That's been some of the subjective evidence that I've seen. And generally, it's not something I just come across and go, oh, wow, look at this. This has got to be Sasquatch. These are areas where there's been a dense amount of sightings.
So, okay, go ahead.
So, and I try to look to that for, it's basically a study I'm working on that I haven't really connected all the dots. So I'm very leery about the one thing I don't want to put out there is junk science. And when I start talking about, well, there's X formations or there's this or that without any supporting evidence or consistent supporting evidence, then I would be contributing to junk science. Mm-hmm. And that's not what I'm about. I'm about saying, let's look at this piece of evidence. Can we debunk it, or can we not? That's more subjective. That's what an investigator does. I can't float out there and say, for example, I look at this much like a criminal investigation. If somebody committed a crime, let's just say this, or somebody committed an incident. Now I'm trying to find out who the perpetrator of the incident is. You know, it's like, okay, I can go by this, I can go by that, I can go by this. It'd be like somebody asking me, well, what does the perpetrator's home look like?